Hey everyone, my name's Tom and welcome to Tom Talks. Today we're going to be talking Star Wars. So chapter 13 of The Mandalorian dropped and I think it's not an understatement to say it's one of sort of the most anticipated episodes, full stop. A lot of people have been looking forward to seeing a particular character on the big screen, and I'm going to put a spoiler warning out now, spoilers for the whole episode. We finally get to see Ahsoka in live action, and that is incredibly cool to see. But the reason I'm making this video, and the reason I'm starting at chapter 13 as opposed to the first 12 chapters, is that I think this episode had a lot to break down. It had little sort of like nuggets of lore that I thought were really cool, and things that have a lot of significance going forward. So I thought I'd make this video both to prepare you for future episodes of The Mandalorian, but also to give casual viewers sort of a better appreciation for just how crazy some of this world building is. So to start with, I'm gonna warn, again, spoiler warning for the episode, but also for Mandalorian, for Clone Wars, for Rebels, for a bunch of the video games, just that sort of stuff. Just putting it straight out there, you probably already can expect that, but just so you know. There will be timestamps down the bottom if you want to skip any that you're concerned about. And finally, I'm not an expert, so please correct me or add anything I missed in the comments. So we're going to start off with talking about sort of the lore things that I noticed in chronological order throughout the episode. First thing I wanted to discuss is the Beskar Spear. Now this features very prominently, Mando wins it at the end, the big bad uses it to fight Ahsoka, and it's a whole thing. From my understanding, Mandalorians didn't really make things out of Beskar, they didn't make melee weapons, which to me raises the question as to whether this was forged by Mandalorians or whether it was made in the aftermath of the Purge by, say, like a weapons collector or something. I don't really have any evidence for this. This is just based off the fact that in like KOTOR 2, for instance, there's a lot of hand-to-hand combat as opposed to melee combat. And we do see, in fact, Mando uses it quite prominently, but we also see generally things like wrist-mounted flamethrowers and so on, more so than more conventional melee weapons that we know, realistically, such as swords and spears and whatever. And obviously the Darksaber is an exception to that. But one interesting thing that this brings up is it's made of Beskar, which, as we saw in this episode, is resistant to lightsabers. So when Mando blocked Ahsoka's lightsabers with his wrist, that's because his wrist thing guards are made of Beskar. So that has really interesting connotations. That means we're probably going to see some sort of like one-on-one Mando versus Moff Gideon with the Darksaber action, because you can block the Darksaber with that Beskar spear. Now another thing that's a bit more sort of niche, and this one is going to require a fair bit of explanation, so you're really going to have to bear with me here. But in a couple of the shots before we see Ahsoka, there is an owl in the trees. Predominantly in this one shot, I'll put the timestamp on screen, and an owl is in the top left. Now, this owl is possibly an owl that we know as Morai in Star Wars canon. Now, to explain Morai, I have to explain a lot of the background, so we're going to start there. In Season 3 of the Clone Wars, episodes 15 to 18, it's something called the Mortis arc. Mortis is this kind of spiritual realm, we'll call it. It's super confusing, and essentially it is a Jedi legend of this place where like all-powerful Force users live. Now, Ahsoka, Anakin, and Obi-Wan get brought to Mortis as part of this mission when this distress beacon comes from the middle of nowhere. They follow it, they get sucked into this like spiritual realm, and then they wake up, I think, on their ship from memory, like 3 days later or something. I can't remember that for sure. But essentially it's this realm sort of outside of the known space, and there is a father, a son, and a daughter. Now those are their names, the father, the son, and the daughter. The son is the embodiment of the dark side of the Force. The daughter, the embodiment of the light. And the father is sort of the grey that keeps them both in check. Now, we don't really have to go into the details of this arc, just know that, there is a good person, there is a bad person. Morai has a spiritual link to the daughter. So Morai is kind of like a spiritual embodiment of the light side of the Force. And for whatever reason, which I won't sort of spoil, Morai has this attachment to Ahsoka. And we see Morai in Rebels in Season 2, and Morai helps Ezra save Ahsoka, and I think it's Season 4. Morai has a strong sort of presence throughout Star Wars and throughout Ahsoka. So, where you see Ahsoka, you quite often see Morai. Now, we have nothing to say that this is actually Morai in these shots, but it's a good indicator that it quite possibly is. And that's really neat. It's just a small little reference. Now, a quick one, most people probably picked up on this, but when Ahsoka is talking about how attachment can make even fully fledged Jedi Knights turn to the dark side, she's obviously referring to Anakin. This is interesting because we do see Ahsoka and Anakin fight in the season 2 finale of Rebels. And up until this point, Ahsoka is not sure that Vader is Anakin. Which means that if that fight had never happened, we might not be having this dialogue here. Because she might be saying, we can't confirm that Vader is Anakin. But in this fight, she does sever Vader's helmet and does see that it's Anakin beneath the helmet. And I just think that's really cool. It really shows that there's that sort of attention to detail, that, Ahsoka isn't just a generic character who only knows what she's told she knows. She has this sort of ability to put things together. It's a very small thing, but I thought it was really cool. Here's a big one that I was really excited about. Mando says, when he's talking about the defenses of the palace, 2 HK-87 assassin droids. Now, HK droids are already a thing in canon. I think it was a bunch of solo resources, like for the movie, that basically said, HK droids, they're gladiatorial droids, they fight, Dryden Voss owns some, don't even worry about it. Like, that's basically just like it. But Mando calls the HK droids assassin droids, right? Now, assassin droids are in Legends, so they're in like the extended canon, like the old canon, and they're a lot more than that. They're like fan favorites. Off the top of my head, the most prominent one is HK-47, who is a party member in the games KOTOR 1 and 2. And you also fight HK-50 droids in KOTOR 2, in HK-51s, I think, in the Old Republic, and I think like HK-54, 55 can become a party member in the Old Republic MMO. But basically what I'm saying is, like, these things have a significant history in Star Wars. Old Republic is like 3,000 years before the movies, so we're talking a long time ago. And to know that they're still produced, hey, that's pretty cool. And I think that's awesome that we can see some stuff done with that. Now, in the Old Republic, they are sort of produced by, I think it's Zerka Corp, but they often work very closely with the Sith Empire. So basically, they're produced by this generic evil corporation, but they're often used by the Sith, and they're like resistant, they're often Jedi killers, and in this episode, we see 2 of them killed with 1 shot. So, baby steps. It's cool that there might be HK droids, but they're clearly not the same as the HK droids from Legends. Now, we briefly see a cat in the streets. A lot of people online are going, oh, Loth cat, Loth cat. We can't really tell what kind of cat it is, but yeah, look, it's probably a Loth cat. Loth cats are this cat from Rebels. They're really well fleshed out there, but they come from a species of cat called Tuca cats. And I think Tuca cats are even more interesting because lots of kids' toys in Star Wars are Tuca cats. And I thought I'd just point that out. That's a cute thing. So if you're ever watching the Clone Wars and you see a kid has a little toy in their basket, it's usually got it's like navy and it's got like 4 little pointy limbs and then 2 pointy ears on top. That's a Tuca cat, and that's the kind of cat that we saw in this episode. Now, the way Ahsoka ignites her lightsabers when she's being chased, this is a reference to the Vader fight in the season 2 finale. And it's really cool to see this. She does a really sick thing where she ignites her sabers next to each other, and it's just classic attention to detail and sort of fan service that I absolutely love. Now, we do see in the final fight, Ahsoka swaps to a reverse grip after she loses her first blade. Now, in Clone Wars, it's established that she did originally fight with just 1 blade. So you see her get her second blade's crystal in Clone Wars, and prior to that, she tended to fight with 1 saber held backwards. So that was a cool little reference to that. One thing I did find interesting, in Rebels it's established you can change the length of the lightsaber, and her offhand saber is, I think, a little bit smaller, so it would have been, she probably could have made that bigger, but hey, it worked, so who cares? Another really cool thing, which blew my mind and was probably the highlight of the episode for me, was when the name was dropped of Grand Admiral Thrawn. Now, this name probably won't mean much to a lot of casual viewers, because Grand Admiral Thrawn is, in my opinion, the single biggest Star Wars character that has never really had a mainstream appearance. Now, he did feature in Star Wars Rebels, but that was a bit more of a niche show. Like, I think everyone has seen Clone Wars, but not everyone has seen Star Wars Rebels. In fact, I'd say less than a quarter of the people that have seen Clone Wars have seen Rebels, in my experience. Grand Admiral Thrawn is essentially this master imperial tactician. He uses art to be able to plan counterattacks and attacks that are essentially perfect. Now, Thrawn is he's created for Heir to the Empire, which was a Star Wars book series a long time ago. Great series, give it a read. So he's an antagonist in that. He was also made sort of the pseudo main character in the Thrawn trilogy, which came out more recently. Now that is canon, and that's a great read. I can't recommend that enough. It's written by the same author that originally created Thrawn, so that's really cool. Now that was made to tie into Thrawn's biggest appearance, which is Star Wars Rebels. Spoiler warning ahead for Rebels, but the last episode sees Ezra, this main character from Rebels, fighting Thrawn on the bridge of a Star Destroyer. Now, the Star Destroyer's bridge is ripped off and teleported into hyperspace by these special creatures that swim through space, and they are never seen again. And the last we see in Rebels is Ahsoka telling one of the other characters, we're gonna go find Ezra. Now, what this means is the significance of this name drop in The Mandalorian is that this means that Thrawn has definitively survived. We know Thrawn has survived. It means Ezra has probably also survived, and it sets up so many consequences for the universe. It means that there is a significant chance we'll be seeing these Rebels characters again, as Grand Admiral Thrawn is still on the loose, which means Ezra quite possibly survived. Now, something interesting I can note is that Grand Admiral Thrawn is hinted to still be alive in the sort of bridging books between episodes 6 and 7, known as the Aftermath trilogy. Now, at the end of the Aftermath trilogy, it's very strongly hinted that Thrawn is behind a lot of the events in the book, but I don't think, to my knowledge, that it's ever confirmed. So please correct me on that if that's true. But it's like, we sort of had this very vague notion that maybe Thrawn survived, and now we've got it confirmed, and that is huge. Now, the last thing I'd like to talk about is the planet Tython. Now, Ahsoka says at the end to Mando, go to the planet Tython. Tython is something I want to talk about because it has a lot of history outside of The Mandalorian. And I think it might set you up going into, whichever episode features it just a little bit better, knowing a bit more about it. Now, Tython is like the birthplace of the original Jedi, known as the Jedi, which is like JED''AII, I think. And it's ridiculous that that's a thing, but whatever. And I think it is a really cool piece of history. So if you ever play the MMO, Star Wars The Old Republic, it's free to play, can't recommend it enough. The Jedi Knight and the Jedi Guardian, I think they're called, both start on this planet. And you'll sort of see some gameplay in the background now. The idea is it's like very much this really ancient Jedi planet with a lot of history behind it. And there's these wreckages of cities that are long, long gone, that are still guarded by, droids that were programmed thousands of years ago, and they're still defending the city years after it went into ruins, which I think sets up really interestingly for The Mandalorian, because obviously Mando, while sort of a little bit over his distaste for droids, still has that there, and it makes me curious to see what happens in an abandoned city whose only residents are, combat droids, and granted, the Old Republic takes place 3,000 years beforehand, so they're probably not there anymore, but it's just a really interesting thing to think about, and I wonder how much of Tython we will see. I think the last interesting thing about Tython is what kind of Jedi we know that are active at this time that may come to train Grogu. And off the top of my head, of course, Luke Skywalker is like a front and foremost possible person to train him. That would be huge if we saw Luke Skywalker. I think I would be a little bit, I don't know, I wouldn't say disappointed. I think I'd just like to see more, sort of more external characters get some love. But that being said, Luke hasn't really, it's one of those things where these sort of series like Rebels, like Clone Wars, like Mandalorian have never really tied that strongly into the original trilogy. Obviously, Rebels has a lot to do with starting the rebellion, but At the same time, it's still kind of disjointed because, you know, you've got Maul, you've got the Mandalorians, they're all very sort of prequel era things. So it's almost like Rebels fits more in with the prequel era than it does the original trilogy. And so if Luke comes, that's really cool. There's also rumors it could be Cal Kestis, who is the protagonist of Jedi Fallen Order, which is one of the video games that came out recently. And there's also rumors that it could now be Ezra Bridger, given he probably survived if Thrawn did. All of these are interesting theories. I also wonder if we might be seeing a Jedi come back, you know, that was never established as being dead. Unlikely, but we'll see how it goes. Anyway, those are my thoughts and some little lore tidbits I noticed in the new episode of The Mandalorian. Please let me know what you think. If you have any feedback, please let me know below. If you have any corrections, let me know. And hopefully the next episode will be just as good. Thank you for taking part in the discussion. I'll catch you next time.